the last week with crews punching holes in walls, in the floor, in the yard, looking for Escobar's hidden spoils.
Beneath Pablo Escobar's lavish estates lay vaults sealed from the world, built to guard more than money. For decades, they were whispered about, lost to rumor and fear.
So I can break some news to you today. They actually did find something.
Beneath the crumbling ruins of Pablo Escobar's empire, a vault sealed for decades has finally been forced open. What lay hidden inside was never meant for the public eye. Objects so disturbing, so extraordinary, they rewrite everything we thought we knew about the world's most infamous drug lord.
What's the most amount of money you've ever seen?
The most money that I could saw, $7 million. But according to my father's money, it was nothing. I met the guy who was taking care of the money. So I asked him, hey, in the golden times that you have with my dad, tell me how much money he was receiving from this business. And he told me only from the city of Miami, every single weekend, your father was receiving between 50 to $70 million in cash every weekend. So imagine Los Angeles, New York, and some other cities. They were using the banks, of course, to transfer the money, and this guy told me that they stopped counting the money. They needed to wait the money because there was more money coming than machines available and people from the bank to count it.
In recent years, construction crews have been seen tearing through walls, digging up floors, and even breaking into gardens in Colombia. They weren't searching for new plumbing lines or forgotten foundations. They were chasing whispers of something far more intriguing: the possibility that Pablo Escobar, one of the most notorious figures in modern history, had left behind hidden vaults packed with money, weapons, and secrets.
For decades, whispers spread of vaults buried beneath Pablo Escobar's mansions. Locals swore they heard drilling beneath the ground, rumors of cash, gold, and even weapons. Then one day, investigators broke through. What they found wasn't just money, it was crates of rifles, ledgers filled with secrets, and the proof of an empire that had ruled Colombia through fear. The legend of Escobar's vaults was no longer just a story.
For decades, stories of Escobar's concealed stashes have fascinated investigators, journalists, and the general public. The idea that fortunes could still be rotting beneath the ground or locked behind concrete walls has kept his legacy alive long after his passing. On several occasions, those rumors have been proven true. Investigators have uncovered weapons, coded ledgers, and in some cases, large sums of cash. Each discovery only deepens the mystery. If these were just fragments of what Escobar left behind, what else might still be buried? To understand how those vaults came to exist, it's necessary to look back at Escobar's early years and the rise of his empire. Contrary to the image of a powerful drug lord who dominated Colombia in the 1980s, Escobar's beginnings were small and in many ways unremarkable. He was born in 1949 in Rio Negro and raised in Medellin, a city that would later become synonymous with his name. His father worked as a farmer and his mother was a teacher, but Escobar was drawn early on to street life rather than the classroom. As a teenager, he showed both ambition and a disregard for the law. One of his first money-making schemes was unusual, even by criminal standards. Escobar would steal gravestones from cemeteries, scrub away the engraved names using sandblasters, and then resell them to unsuspecting buyers. It was a crude business, but it revealed an important part of his character. He was willing to take risks, exploit opportunities, and profit from desperation. From gravestones, he graduated to car theft, extortion, and gang activity. In these small-time operations, he gained a reputation for both resourcefulness and brutality. By the early 1970s, Escobar had moved beyond petty theft. He became involved in kidnappings for ransom, a tactic that quickly turned violent. Victims were often killed even after their families had paid, sending a clear message that Escobar and his associates were not men to be crossed. One of the most infamous cases took place in 1971, when businessman Diego Echevarria was abducted. Despite a ransom payment of $50,000, Echevarria was murdered. For Escobar's group, the crime provided money, but more importantly, it cemented their reputation for ruthlessness. Word spread quickly across Medellin and beyond. These were men who valued power and fear just as much as profit. Around this time, Escobar encountered the trade that would define his life and reshape entire countries: cocaine. In the early 1970s, smuggling routes between Colombia, Central America, and the United States were beginning to form. Demand in North America was growing rapidly, and Escobar saw the opportunity long before most others did. In 1976, he was caught transporting 39 kilograms of cocaine, hidden in a car tire. For most people, such an arrest might have ended a criminal career. For Escobar, it reinforced a philosophy he would carry with him until the end. In Colombia, money had the power to erase legal problems, and violence had the power to erase opponents. Escobar bribed his way out of prison, and shortly after, the officer responsible for arresting him was killed. The message was unmistakable. Anyone who stood in his way could be silenced, either with cash or with bullets. This approach became known as plata o plomo, which translates to silver or lead. It was a crude but effective creed: accept the bribe or face the consequences. The strategy allowed Escobar to expand his influence beyond the underworld. Bribery secured more than just freedom, it secured loyalty and political protection. By the late 1970s, Escobar was no longer a small-time smuggler. He was making contacts with traffickers across Colombia and beyond, looking for ways to scale the trade. In April 1978, he attended a gathering on a rural farm along with other traffickers. That meeting marked the birth of what would soon be known as the Medellin cartel. Within months, their combined operations were sending thousands of kilograms of cocaine into the United States. At its peak, shipments reached nearly 19,000 kilograms at a time, and demand was insatiable. Escobar recognized that cocaine was not just profitable, it had the potential to reshape global markets and destabilize governments. He intended to be at the center of it. To move such massive amounts of drugs, Escobar and his associates needed infrastructure. One of his most notable moves was turning Norman's Cay, a small island in the Bahamas, into a strategic smuggling hub. The island featured its own private airstrip, a dock for incoming boats, and refrigerated warehouses to store cocaine before it was moved to the United States. From this fortress-like base, shipments flowed north with unprecedented efficiency. The profits from Norman's Cay alone dwarfed anything Escobar had previously imagined. As money began to pour in, Escobar started to reshape his public image. In Antioquia, the region surrounding Medellin, he purchased a sprawling 7,000-acre estate he named Hacienda Nápoles. The property was as much a spectacle as it was a home. It featured a colonial-style mansion, artificial lakes, a private zoo with exotic animals including giraffes, elephants, and even hippos, as well as life-size dinosaur statues scattered across the grounds. This extravagance was not just about personal enjoyment. Escobar understood the power of image. To the poor communities of Medellin, he presented himself as a benefactor. He financed housing projects, built schools and football fields, and supported neighborhood development. For many, he became a kind of Robin Hood figure, a man who took from the rich or the foreign and gave to the poor. This perception was powerful enough to carry him into politics. In 1982, Escobar entered Colombia's Congress as an alternate representative for the Liberal Party. He secured diplomatic immunity and a passport that allowed him to travel freely. Publicly, he claimed his fortune came from a teenage bicycle rental business. Privately, billions were already flowing through his cocaine empire. Escobar's political career, however, was short-lived. Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla investigated his background and exposed him as a drug trafficker. Liberal leader Luis Carlos Galán expelled him from the party, forcing Escobar to withdraw from politics by 1984. Just 3 months later, Lara Bonilla was assassinated, a crime widely attributed to Escobar. This marked a turning point. From this point forward, Escobar was not just a trafficker with political connections, he was a criminal openly at war with Colombia's institutions. Judges were bribed, threatened, or killed. When the government tried to extradite traffickers to the United States, Escobar financed campaigns of violence to resist. By the mid-1980s, Escobar had established himself as a figure unlike any Colombia had seen before. He was a smuggler, a politician, a philanthropist to the poor, and a ruthless enforcer all at once. The vaults that crews still dig for today were a natural extension of this lifestyle. Escobar trusted no banks and few associates. Money was hidden in walls, buried in fields, and locked in underground chambers. These caches were not just storage, they were insurance policies, designed to protect both his wealth and his survival. The cocaine trade did not just make Pablo Escobar rich, it reshaped the way he viewed power. Once the Medellin network began operating at scale, the profits arrived in waves so large that ordinary accounting no longer applied. Business practices turned into logistics problems, and logistics problems turned into security problems. Escobar's answer was to build a system that mixed ruthless efficiency with spectacle. He wanted to move product faster than his rivals, hide money more securely than the banks, and use his wealth to buy the one thing he valued most: control. Smuggling routes into the United States multiplied through the late 1970s and early 1980s. The cartel used fast aircraft that could hop from secluded airstrips to islands and on toward Florida, as well as boats and overland couriers. At the center of this early expansion stood a small island in the Bahamas known as Norman's Cay. There, Escobar's associates developed what amounted to a private logistics hub. It had an airstrip long enough to support repeated landings by light planes, a dock to receive shipments, basic refrigeration to keep cargo safe, and a perimeter that discouraged casual visitors. The island's setup allowed frequent flights to move cocaine northward with minimal interruption, a crucial advantage as demand soared. Accounts from law enforcement, journalists, and former traffickers have described Norman's Cay as one of the most important staging points of the era. When the money from these shipments began to accumulate, Escobar did more than buy houses and cars. He designed a kind of public theater that served multiple purposes. In Antioquia, he created Hacienda Nápoles, a vast estate that was part home, part museum of excess, and part message to his rivals and to the state. Visitors saw artificial lakes, a colonial-style mansion, and large sculptures that seemed more fitting for a theme park than a private residence. He stocked the property with exotic animals, including hippos that would outlive him and later become their own problem for local authorities. The estate was a statement: wealth this large could build anything, anywhere, and ignore the rules that governed everyone else. At the same time, Escobar worked on his image among ordinary people. In Medellin's poorer neighborhoods, he funded football pitches, housing projects, and community facilities. Families who had little interaction with the state suddenly saw roads being paved and classrooms being built. For many, it was easier to admire the man who showed up with solutions than to trust institutions that had often failed them. Local newspapers and oral histories captured this Robin Hood aura, one that Escobar encouraged at every turn. He made sure cameras saw him visiting charity projects and presenting himself as a defender of the poor. This did not erase the violence that followed him, but it complicated how he was viewed on the streets where he held the most influence. Politics soon followed. In 1982, Escobar entered Congress as an alternate representative for the Liberal Party. Officially, he explained his fortune in simple terms, pointing to legitimate ventures from his youth. Unofficially, the scope of his operation was already obvious to investigators and rivals alike. Within a short time, prominent figures, including Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, publicly labeled him a trafficker. Party leader Luis Carlos Galán pushed him out of the political fold. The debate about his past and present ended not with a court case but with a killing. Lara Bonilla was assassinated in 1984, a crime widely attributed to Escobar's network. From that point on, the relationship between Escobar and the state was open conflict. The business kept growing even as the violence escalated. Shipments to the United States reached extraordinary volumes. Former officials and investigative reporting have described daily inflows measured in tons, supported by a chain of pilots, maritime crews, airstrips, warehouses, and distribution points. Demand in the U.S. market continued to outpace enforcement capacity, which meant the Medellin cartel could replace seized loads and arrested couriers with relative ease. Money circulated so quickly that it created practical problems. Counting, storing, and protecting it became full-time jobs. Escobar's answer to these problems was again a mix of improvisation and paranoia. He distrusted banks, limited who could see his books, and relied on caches. Cash went into walls, barrels, and underground vaults. His brother Roberto would later describe how a significant percentage of stored money was lost to mold, water, or rats, a scale of waste that would be unthinkable in a normal business but barely dented the cartel's revenue. Rubber bands, of all things, became a monthly expense line, used to keep stacks organized. The image of wealth being burned for heat during a period in hiding became a kind of grim legend repeated by relatives and retold in media profiles to show just how distorted the value of money had become inside Escobar's world. By the mid to late 1980s, his assets spanned multiple properties designed for different purposes. In Medellin, he built the Monaco building, an 8-story complex that combined family life with fortress-like security. Reinforced spaces, guarded garages, and the ability to bunker down on short notice. In Guatapé, the lakeside house known as La Manuela served as an escape and a place to entertain. On Isla Grande in the Caribbean, a fortified residence with a helicopter pad gave him access to coastal routes. The car collection mixed rare sports models, classic American sedans, and practical off-road vehicles used in cartel operations. Each purchase said something about how he saw himself: powerful, untouchable, and always moving. The state, however, was not standing still. Colombia, under pressure from the United States, revived the policy of extraditing traffickers to face trial abroad. For Escobar, this was the red line. He demanded guarantees against extradition in exchange for any surrender. When those guarantees were not given, the violence intensified. The campaign included bombings and assassinations that shocked the country and drew international attention. Key political figures were targeted. Flights were attacked. Court buildings and press offices were hit. The goal was simple and brutal: force the government to abandon extradition by making the cost too high. Public records, contemporary reporting, and later documentaries have mapped these years with grim detail, noting specific dates, targets, and consequences. The pattern became clear. When the state moved to constrain the cartel responded by making politics itself dangerous. Judges, police, and ministers faced threats that reached their families. In that climate, bribery and coercion, summed up by the phrase plata o plomo, silver or lead, were not separate tools but two sides of the same coin. If money could not buy a result, violence was deployed to achieve it. Escobar's wealth rose alongside this campaign. International outlets, including business magazines at the time, listed him among the world's richest people, estimating his fortune in the billions. These figures were always approximations, given the covert nature of his business, but they captured the scale. Profits from the U.S. market combined with growing routes into Europe meant the cartel controlled a significant share of global supply. With that volume came both influence and exposure. Every new route or safe house created a chance for a leak. Every new ally created a potential informant. Even at the height of his power, signs of strain were visible inside the network. Rival factions within Colombia contested territory and access. International partners demanded reliability that could be hard to maintain during periods of intense police pressure. And the very methods that helped Escobar rise, fear and centralized control, made the organization brittle. If he was forced into hiding or jail, decision-making slowed. If trusted couriers defected, entire supply chains could be exposed in a single afternoon. Meanwhile, the public image that had carried him into politics began to crack. The same communities that received new football fields and housing also lived with bomb scares, shootouts, and grieving families. Local journalists and civic leaders documented how support for Escobar fluctuated with each attack and each funeral. The Robin Hood narrative did not disappear, but it sat uneasily beside the stories of people caught in the crossfire. This tension would define the years ahead. He could not be both a folk hero and the author of the fear that stalked city streets. International pressure heightened in direct response to attacks that claimed the lives of civilians and public figures. Coordination with U.S. agencies expanded. Intelligence sharing improved. Communication intercepts and surveillance technologies made it harder for traffickers to speak freely by radio or phone. The center of gravity began to shift from luxury and growth to defense and survival. It did not happen all at once, but the trend was clear. Escobar had built an empire that depended on his ability to overpower or outspend his opponents. As the state adapted and the risks grew, money alone could not buy the level of safety he wanted. Even so, the infrastructure he had created, airstrips, safe houses, corrupt networks, and caches, gave him room to maneuver. He was adept at disappearing for weeks at a time, only to reappear long enough to reorganize shipments or send messages through intermediaries. Associates from earlier years, who once basked in his protection, began to reconsider their loyalties. Some left the country, others stayed but kept their heads down and their options open. For prosecutors and police, this period produced a steady stream of arrests and seizures, alongside frequent disappointments. Tip-offs were common. Raids came up empty with suspicious regularity. It was a reminder that money granted Escobar not just comforts but also reach. Through all of this, the vaults and hidden rooms remained essential. They were not relics of superstition, they were the backbone of his financial strategy. Ledgers recording payments and shipments were kept in places that would be difficult to find and harder to interpret. Cash, stored in bulk, allowed him to pay loyalists immediately, to bribe officials when needed, and to restart operations after losses. Weapons stored alongside currency underscored a basic rule of his world. Every asset was also a potential shield. This is the paradox at the center of part 2 of his story. Escobar's rise was built on momentum, more routes, more product, more money, more influence. But the very scale that made him powerful demanded systems for concealment and coercion that escalated the conflict. The charity projects that won him applause also drew cameras to his face, which made him a target. The properties that demonstrated his wealth also gave investigators places to search. The political ambitions that gave him legal cover also pushed him into the public arena, where exposure becomes risk. By the late 1980s, he stood at a high point that already carried the shape of a fall. He had the cash to buy almost anything. He had estates that looked like fantasy parks and safe houses that operated like bunkers. He had supporters who viewed him as a benefactor and enemies who viewed him as the country's greatest threat. The state was no longer simply responding, it was organizing. Contacts in foreign capitals were no longer limited to diplomatic cables. They included joint task forces and specialized teams focused on him by name. The existence of hidden vaults was not just speculation. During raids in the 1980s and 1990s, Colombian police uncovered real examples of Escobar's underground storage. Behind false walls or inside steel containers, they found weapons stockpiles, ledgers detailing operations, and sometimes bundles of cash still neatly wrapped. For investigators, each discovery confirmed that Escobar had built an invisible empire beneath his visible one. These stashes were not only meant to hold profits, they were war chests and survival kits, designed for use in moments of crisis. The secrecy around these vaults was extreme. Associates later described how Escobar limited knowledge of their locations to only a handful of trusted people. His brother Roberto admitted that billions of dollars were stored in ways that were vulnerable to natural decay. Rats chewed through stacks of mold-ruined bundles. In some cases, entire caches became useless. yet the amounts were so large that the losses hardly mattered. What was destroyed in one place could be replaced many times over from shipments still flowing into the United States and Europe. Stories of Escobar's hidden wealth spread far beyond Colombia. In Miami, for example, he owned a pastel-colored mansion with direct access to Biscayne Bay. Authorities suspected that the property contained safes built into its structure. When it was seized in the mid-1980s, the house became the focus of rumors. Decades later, when new owners demolished the building, workers found reinforced containers hidden in the foundation. One safe reportedly disappeared before it could be properly examined, adding to the mystery. Another was removed under armed guard and placed in secure storage. These discoveries reignited public fascination. In 2016, when developers unearthed more remains of the Miami property, speculation once again surged. Media coverage highlighted the possibility that millions could still be hidden in walls, fields, or sealed barrels across Colombia and beyond. Some stories proved true, others exaggerated. But the effect was the same. Escobar's legend grew larger with every find. The search for Escobar's money became a global spectacle in 2017, when the Discovery Channel launched a program called Finding Escobar's Millions. Former CIA operatives Doug Lokes and Ben Smith traveled through Colombia, using drones, ground-penetrating radar, and metal detectors. They explored old cartel estates and farmland, hoping to locate hidden vaults. The series documented both the technology and the personal risks involved. Though they uncovered safes and signs of concealment, the most promising discoveries often turned out to be empty. Still, the program revealed just how sophisticated Escobar's methods were. Vaults were sometimes lined with lead, disguised inside walls, or built into reinforced bunkers. Surviving cartel members and relatives also contributed to the story. Escobar's sister, Luz Maria, spoke of her attempts to make peace with victims by visiting graves. Former hitman John Jairo Velasquez, known as Popeye, admitted to ordering thousands of killings. Another associate, known as the Scorpion, claimed that vast amounts of money were still buried across Medellin. Their testimony reinforced the idea that Escobar's wealth had been so vast and so widely dispersed that it could never be fully recovered. Occasionally, more tangible discoveries surfaced. In 2020, Escobar's nephew Nicolas claimed he had found $18 million hidden in one of his uncle's former houses. He said a vision had led him to the spot, where he uncovered bundles of bills wrapped in plastic along with a gold pen, a typewriter, and a satellite phone. Most of the money had decayed beyond use, destroyed by damp conditions, but the story was enough to fuel global headlines. Nicolas admitted that he had found other caches in the past, though he refused to share details. Newspaper archives in Colombia show that these discoveries were not isolated. Over the years, police and farmers uncovered millions stored in barrels, boxes, or sealed rooms. In 1989, around $4 million were recovered from a cache. In 1990, authorities reported finding $25 million alongside gold bars. In 2009, a further $10 million was discovered at Hacienda Napoli, his famous estate. Official tallies suggest that about $75 million have been retrieved in total. Investigators, however, estimate that at least 10 times that amount could still remain hidden. These finds often spark disputes over ownership. In some cases, the money had deteriorated beyond recognition. In others, bundles were found in surprisingly good condition. Farmers who stumbled across caches sometimes argued they should be allowed to keep part of the discovery, while officials insisted it belonged to the state. In one case, a farmer unearthed sealed drums of dollars so well preserved, they looked freshly buried. The debate that followed underscored the lingering power of Escobar's fortune, decades after his death. While money fascinated the public, investigators were often more concerned with the other contents of Escobar's vault. In addition to cash, they found weapons, grenades, and ammunition. Some vaults contained rocket launchers, body armor, and crates of rifles. These were not just hiding places for profit, they were arsenals prepared for conflict. Even more significant were the documents. Hidden in waterproof containers, investigators uncovered ledgers recording shipments, coded financial transactions, and lists of payments to politicians, police, and judges. These records were dangerous, not because of their size, but because of what they revealed. They provided a blueprint of how the cartel operated, mapping corruption and influence across Colombia and beyond. Accounts from former associates also suggested something darker. Some described rooms that were soundproof, windowless, and fitted with drainage systems. The implication was clear. These were interrogation or torture chambers, built into the same properties that housed families and zoos. While formal investigations never confirmed every rumor, the descriptions aligned with Escobar's reputation for intimidation. Whether or not every chamber existed, the fear that they might was enough to serve his purposes. Escobar's obsession with secure spaces reached its peak in 1991, when he negotiated an unusual deal with the Colombian government. Under pressure from the United States, officials wanted him imprisoned. Escobar agreed to surrender on one condition: he would not be extradited. Instead of entering an ordinary prison, he was allowed to design his own. The result was Las Catedral, a facility high on a mountain overlooking Medellin. Las Catedral did not resemble a prison in the conventional sense. Escobar chose his own guards, loyal men who answered only to him. The compound included luxuries such as a bar, a jacuzzi, a football pitch, and even a dollhouse for his daughter. A telescope on the balcony allowed him to look toward Medellin and even glimpse his family home. To the outside world, it became known as Hotel Escobar or Club Medellin. Behind the luxury, the design served a practical purpose. Las Catedral was built with escape routes, hidden doors, and ventilated passageways. Its mountaintop location, often shrouded in fog and protected by cliffs, made military assault difficult. Escobar even kept weapons inside, ensuring he could defend himself if threatened. For more than a year, the arrangement held. He lived as both prisoner and king, continuing to direct operations from within. The illusion collapsed in 1992, when reports surfaced that he had ordered the torture and killing of several of his own men inside the prison. The scandal forced the government to act. Authorities announced he would be transferred to a regular facility. Escobar refused. When troops surrounded Las Catedral in July, he escaped through a wall deliberately built with weak concrete, vanishing into the fog with his men. Las Catedral was abandoned, but its legend grew. Years later, in 2007, Benedictine monks transformed the site into a monastery. They added a chapel, a library, and a memorial to Escobar's victims. Pilgrims and tourists still visit, walking the same grounds where Escobar had once lived in surreal comfort. The obsession with concealment did not end there. Informants later claimed that Escobar had constructed underground catacombs fitted with air circulation systems, allowing him to hide for days. Police raids on Medellin, safe houses uncovered partial shafts and freshly dug tunnels, confirming that escape routes were part of his survival strategy. Whether in a custom-built prison or a suburban hideout, Escobar designed his environment with secrecy in mind. Every wall might conceal a passage, and every floor might cover a vault. American involvement in the hunt for Escobar formally expanded in 1989, when President George H.W. Bush authorized Operation Heavy Shadow. The mission was intended to assist Colombia in dismantling the Medellin cartel. Surveillance technology, particularly the expertise of a unit known as Centra Spike, played a crucial role. This team specialized in tracking fugitives by intercepting radio and phone signals. For years they listened to Escobar's calls, noting his calm and deliberate voice as he alternated between ordering kidnappings and speaking tenderly to his family. Their work put constant pressure on his movements and eventually narrowed the spaces where he could hide. Despite this, Escobar remained elusive. His influence inside Colombia's police and military allowed him to slip away repeatedly, often at each raid that failed to capture him reminded investigators how deep his reach went. Bribes, threats, and loyalists inside the system gave him an advantage even as foreign technology worked against him. In 1991, Escobar struck a controversial deal that allowed him to retreat into Los Catedral, the custom-built prison he designed himself. As long as he remained inside and did not face extradition, the Colombian government could claim that he was under control. The arrangement collapsed the following year when reports surfaced that Escobar had ordered the torture and execution of men inside the facility. Faced with scandal, the government moved to transfer him to a conventional prison. Escobar simply walked out through a wall built for escape and vanished into Medellin with a group of his men. The escape humiliated the Colombian government and infuriated Washington. U.S. officials had warned against allowing Escobar to create his own prison. Now they pushed for full involvement in the manhunt. Ambassador Morris Busby, a former Navy officer, argued that only a joint effort could corner Escobar. The Americans supplied technology, surveillance and advisors. Colombia provided manpower and political cover. The agreement was unspoken but clear. This time, Escobar would not be taken to lead the Colombian side of the search. Authorities turned to Colonel Hugo Martinez. Unlike some of his predecessors, Martinez had a reputation for refusing bribes and resisting intimidation. He had already survived attempts on his life and threats against his family. Under his command, the search block, a special police unit, was reorganized and retrained. Their mission was singular: track down and eliminate Escobar. Even with new discipline, the task was enormous. Escobar remained protected by layers of informants and loyalists. He shifted between safe houses, communicated through intermediaries, and relied on his network of hidden tunnels. Each time the search block came close, he managed to slip away. His ability to vanish in the final became so common that American operators referred to it bitterly as the last 100 yards. At the same time, a new force emerged that changed the dynamics of the manhunt. Known as Los Pepes, short for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, this vigilante group targeted Escobar's associates, properties, and family members. They left bodies in the streets, with signs pinned to their clothing. They bombed safe houses and destroyed businesses linked to the cartel. Unlike the state, Los Pepes offered no deals and no chance of survival. Their campaign sent a clear message: anyone connected to Escobar could be killed. The origins of Los Pepes were murky, but evidence suggested that former cartel allies, rival traffickers, played central roles. Families of murdered partners also joined the effort, using their resources and knowledge of the cartel to guide attacks. While the U.S. and Colombian governments officially condemned the violence, the overlap between Los Pepes targets and official intelligence was difficult to ignore. Many observers concluded that the vigilantes operated with tacit support, or at least with information that flowed from the manhunt itself. For Escobar, the impact was devastating. Violence had always been his greatest weapon, but now it was being turned against him. Associates defected or surrendered. Safe houses were destroyed. Even his family faced relentless threats. He was increasingly isolated, forced to rely on a shrinking circle of loyalists, while his rivals grew stronger. Betrayals accelerated his decline. Former allies, including Carlos Leder, provided information to authority. Paramilitary leader Fidel Castaño, once close to the cartel, began feeding intelligence to U.S. and Colombian forces after Escobar murdered friends and partners. Families of former associates, driven by revenge, supplied lists of properties, contacts, and financial details. Some even worked directly with investigators abroad, offering precise information about his movements. By late 1993, Escobar's options were narrowing. His wealth was still vast, but his ability to use it was limited. Large purchases drew attention. Trusted couriers had been compromised. Safe houses were discovered within weeks or even days. The vaults and caches that once seemed like security were no longer enough to protect him from betrayal. The pressure mounted with every passing month. Colombian authorities placed a bounty of 5 billion pesos, the largest ever offered at the time, for information leading to his capture. Centra Spike continued to track his phone calls, noting that despite knowing the risks, Escobar could not resist calling his family. He was a father as well as a trafficker, and those conversations provided the openings investigators needed. On December 2nd, 1993, the day after his 44th birthday, Escobar made a long call to his son Juan Pablo. Centra Spike intercepted the signal and narrowed his location to a modest house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. Colonel Martinez and the search block moved quickly, surrounding the block. Inside, Escobar and his loyal bodyguard, Alvaro de Jesus Agudelo, known as El Limon, were aware of the danger, but may have underestimated how close the hunt had come. When police closed in, El Limon tried to escape first, crashing through a window and running across a rooftop. He was cut down by gunfire. Escobar followed, armed with 2 pistols, as he scrambled across the tiles. Shots were fired from multiple directions. He was struck in the leg, the back, and the head. Within moments, the world's most notorious trafficker lay dead beside his bodyguard. The exact details of his death remain disputed. Colombian police credited one of their officers with firing the fatal shot. Others believe that rival groups may have delivered the final blow. Some even argued that Escobar had fulfilled his promise never to be captured alive by turning the gun on himself. Forensic examinations supported multiple possibilities, but no definitive conclusion has ever been reached. What is clear is that his death ended a chapter of Colombian history defined by fear and violence. For many Colombians, relief was immediate. The man who had bombed flights, assassinated politicians, and terrorized cities was gone. Crowds gathered to view his body, lowered from the rooftop where he had fallen. Photographs taken at the scene became iconic images of his downfall, yet the aftermath was complicated. Los Pepes continued their campaign, targeting those who had once stood with Escobar. Rival groups filled the vacuum left by the Medellin cartel, ensuring that violence did not disappear, but simply changed shape. For Colombia, Escobar's death was not the end of the drug, a turning point in how it was organized and fought. Internationally, his death was presented as a victory in the war on drugs. U.S. officials pointed to the cooperation between intelligence teams and Colombian forces as proof that persistence could defeat even the most powerful traffickers. But within Colombia, many viewed it differently. Escobar had been killed, but the systems of corruption, poverty, and demand that had allowed him to rise remained in place. Even decades later, questions linger. Who fired the final shot? How much of his fortune remains hidden? Could his empire have been dismantled without the scale of violence that consumed Colombia during those years? These questions ensure that Escobar's story continues to be studied, debated, and retold. What is certain is that Escobar's empire, once described in billions of dollars and tons of cocaine, collapsed not just under external pressure, but also under its own weight. The vaults, the tunnels, and the fortresses could not save him when his enemies grew too many and his allies too few. His life ended on a Medellin rooftop, hunted in the very city where his rise had begun.